Hey everybody, this is Annette Evans from On Her Own, and I've got with me Lee from the Obscene Sailor, who you might have seen comment on some of my posts, and I've commented on some of his. And we're in a kind of unique place, I like to think, where we're both thinking about what it means to live with self-defense as part of normal, ordinary lives. So, guns aren't the focus. Being safe 100% of the time isn't the focus. Sometimes we do slightly risky things like meet strangers on the internet and think about knocking privates with them. I made Lee laugh.
We made it farther than I expected. And we have both had a lot of very good conversations in public view and outside as we talk about the absurdity of how do you go on a first date potentially knowing that tab A and slot B is going to happen while I have a gun appendix right next to tab A that I'm kind of not looking forward to being found because that's not a conversation that I want to have.
And then
Um,
from my end, I'm thinking about there's a lot of times I talk to a lot of women, and I've talked to a lot of men who have dated a lot of women, Caleb. And how many of us go on that first date more concerned with how we look and how we present than how we stay safe? And let's face it, women are at a really high risk and we're really worried about being assaulted. And that's unfortunately just the way it is. And what I want to do is not say, well, don't meet strangers from the internet and don't meet strangers in the internet in order to sleep with them. I want to say, well, what's the best way to do it? Can you have a life where you're really concerned about being safe and do these risky things in the best way possible?
Um, and I think it's important here for men, especially, to rephrase and reassess how we look at that particular problem as well. I have a NCHI study here that's not fantastic, but it's indicative that about 1 in 6 men are going to be assaulted that we know about within their lifetimes.
It's a lot.
Um, During my last few years in uniform, in Hawaii, the sexual assault program had gotten very, very interested in getting men to better report. And from the reporting that we had within Hawaii, it was about a 50-50 between male sexual assault victims and female, which is not the public perception. That's not the perception within hyper macho gun dudes that a lot of our audience is going to be. But that 50-50 is better capturing the truth as we kind of know it. It
Yeah, and I
at
think
least needs to be a consideration for men as well.
yeah, and I think for women, that's something that's important to think about there too is, how you behave may not be seen as, what you think it is. Like you might think you're just being a little aggressive, but maybe you're being too aggressive too. So lots to be concerned about there, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I know that we have a TikTok video that we're going to link in the description for this about a first date gone wrong, and I think that that's now's the best time to jump into this of what do we do to establish those boundaries? We talk about it within the context of the management of unknown contacts. What about if it's a known contact? How do we articulate those boundaries in advance, and how do we go about enforcing them to give somebody the benefit of the doubt that they maybe just made a legitimate misstep? Dating is always stressful, and we are way more worried about how we look and how we present than we maybe are about security. How do we reconcile what could be a legitimate misstep and what could be aggressive indications of ill will and ill intent?
So this video, and like Lee said, we'll link this, but what happens in it is a woman is recording a man from their first date. Apparently they had originally decided to go out to dinner. Instead, they end up changing plans, go back to his apartment to watch a movie. He wants to sleep with her. She says no. He starts getting angry. She hits record on a video that ends up on TikTok. And part of what goes on there is he talks about how, if people are hooking up with each other on Tinder, the point is to have sex. It's not to date, it's just to sleep together. And she's saying, well, that's not what it said on your profile. I thought, we were going to have a date. And he goes, well, if I put that on my profile, I wouldn't get any matches.
The question that I think all of this stems around is what are we dating for? Are we looking for the next on his own? Are we looking for, oh God, please no female obscene sailor. That's just not not what anyone needs. But what are we looking for? If we're looking for, it's 2021. I'm recently-ish divorced. There is a point for a hookup. There is a point for a relationship that is explicitly sexual in nature that is not going to be anything more because there's times that that's what we want and those needs are just as legitimate as the need for a relationship.
And I think that having that expectation up front, or at least having the expectation up front of, hey, I'm really into this for the sex and the possibility of sex. So that's something I'm, really interested in versus I want to meet new people and take long walks on the beach. Either are equally valid, but you can see, especially in this video, where when one person thinks they're getting on this app to find someone to bump uglies with, and the other one thinks that she's on there to find somebody to spend the rest of her life with, how that could be a point of miscommunication.
And that initial conversation is always very strange, and we always want to portray the best version of ourselves. Um, I've done everything from manipulate my cats to get interest to talk about motorcycle trips and most recently repairing a waxed canvas bag that had come off of the back end of my motorcycle as my lead-ins for talking to people.
Hmm.
Um, there is absolutely nothing wrong with any direction that you want to go, but that initial conversation at least needs to capture what it is that you're looking for to really reiterate and to get a feel for what the other person's looking for. Um, there's nothing wrong with those things not lining up. And I think it's way better to figure that out in the early conversation than before you're at risk.
Right. Because if you don't have those deal breakers lined up early on, then that's when violence and assault happens. In this TikTok video, it's the dude yelling at her, and she's trapped there. She's waiting for her Uber that she's called. And that's kind of, we'll talk about, first date safety and expectations, but she's kind of trapped there for some amount of time. And really what it comes down to is that mismatch in expectations. And there's a couple of weeks of talking beforehand about what's a deal breaker and what's not a deal breaker. If no sex on the first date is a deal breaker, then everybody needs to know that. Now you
I,
can change your mind on that first date, meet them and be, you can go into that first date going, yeah, I'm totally cool with this as an idea. Meet them and go, oh God, no. That's okay. But you
and
can prevent a lot of problems if you kind of go in with the same expectation.
and I feel like it's important to be able to articulate what it is that we're looking for.
Mhm.
As someone who is actively dating, I need to be able to tell a potential partner what it is that I'm looking for them to potentially bring to my life. I need to know it as much as anything else.
Mhm.
Um, that's how we build those boundaries is having that understanding of what's okay, what it is that I'm looking for. And that is entirely contextual. I have had relationships where previously pictures and video had been exchanged. There had been a lot of sexual interest that in the moment did not feel okay. Um, Sometimes you end up in a trailer park and you didn't really think that you were going to. And
I feel like there's a story there.
oh, there is, and that's also why the Smith and Wesson 43C is perhaps not the best first date gun, no matter how easily hidden it is. But we're allowed to change our minds. But
Mhm.
until we know what it is that we're looking for and have that bar, we're not changing our mind at that point. We're making up our mind and everything is brand new, everything is novel. We're so far behind the power curve. In the case of my trailer park incident, it was entirely novel to turn down sexual advances for me for where I was at in life. Um, Thankfully, I had a whole lot of good mentors. Thank you, Caleb, um, who, I because I was comfortable dating, the only thing that I was really worried about there was not being entirely rude in case I had misread the situation, and at a later date we could maybe reconvene. But at that particular moment, I didn't feel safe. And that was the only thing that I needed to worry about was handling that aspect of it because thankfully I was not worried about handling the physical security aspect. Um,
That physical security piece, I think, is especially hard for women because in a lot of ways we come in behind the curve, right? Um, it is a distinct reality for me that I can go out on a date and that man will absolutely be able to physically overpower me, no matter how well prepared I am, how well trained I am. The whole point is to let him within arm's reach. So there's a limit there, and I think that that's something that's easy to forget to think about.
and for reference here, for those who don't know us, I'm 6'1", about 180 pounds. You do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which I do not. You have considerably more edged weapon experience. You're a better shooter than I am. You're the better applied violence participant. But in the context of a date at that kind of social distance,
I'm
it's
5'4". Um, I don't weigh as little as I'd like to, as all women, but you still have, 30, 40 pounds on me, which is significant when you consider that's nearly a third of my body weight.
a, and considerably more reach and more
More upper
leverage.
more upper body strength because no matter how much I work out, and I'm trying here, I'm female, right?
And understanding that from a male perspective, to indulge my inner chauvinist just like this much, guys, we need to acknowledge this, especially if we are seeing someone who has had past trauma or is part of this community. We need to acknowledge that informed consent means uh, going out of our way to make a partner, potential partner, date feel physically comfortable.
One thing I really appreciated about my partner now is that when we met, and I was a little bit more skittish then, I had been coming out of some self-defense incidents and everything else, I was much more skittish then. And he made a point of never pushing at some of the boundaries, silent boundaries I had in place. I didn't have to say, I don't want you to know where I live. It was simply, he offered me a ride home once. And I'm like, oh, no, it's no big deal. I'll walk. He didn't push. He in leaving town, he kind of drove by where I was walking, but he didn't, turn the corner and follow me. He mentioned that he had, and actually that made it seem less creepy. It's like, oh, it turns out we were going in the same direction. Then I don't feel followed, right? But at the same time, he's acknowledging that, yeah, you don't have to say it, right? Like boundaries don't have to be, I don't have to hand over a rule list on the first date. But being sensitive to that is something I think is really important and it can really help. It's communication without communication with communication.
And understanding that we are all I I have a checklist because therapy is wonderful. And I have a checklist of these are the things that I'm looking for. These are the things, but if we don't acknowledge that those boundaries and the things that we're looking for are going to change, I if I am in a predominantly physical relationship, someone that I'm friends with, but the extent of our relationship is sexual, and that evolves into something more, we should make it a point to acknowledge the shifting boundaries and acknowledge the changing boundaries. And the same with vice versa. If I go on a couple dates with someone and there's a lot of physical chemistry and we decide that we're better off as friends, making it a point to acknowledge that shifting boundary, even non-verbally, just in a change of behavior, I think goes a very long way in making everyone feel comfortable and making it more enjoyable for everyone, which is kind of the point of dating, is to have fun.
Right. So sometimes, it's about being very upfront about what your expectations are, where your boundaries are. And I think that, your dating profile is the place for that. If you're totally in this for the sex, let people know. That's okay. And I'll say up front, one of the problems I have are people who slut shame women for saying that's what they're in it for. You know what? If that's what you want to do and you can do it safely, and I'm talking about your physical safety, your sexual safety, your emotional safety, go ahead. And the same goes for men. But if that's not what you want, then you should be able to rely on the fact that other people are clear on that boundary. And you should be able to be clear on your boundaries to other people. Like this is a mix of explicit communication with folks and implicit communication. Don't be the person with the mixed messages, I think is kind of the thing. Not because you're going to be perfect. None of us are in that. We're going to accidentally mix message all the time. But the more thoughtful we are about it, the less likely we are to run into somebody who accidentally, unintentionally hurts us, which is certainly something that happens, even
Oh,
from a physical safety and a sexual safety manner. And it's something that prevents that anger moment. But I thought that's what you were here for.
and in referencing that TikTok video, because it is such a fantastic capture of different expectations, acknowledging upfront, like, I'm sorry, dudes, you're better off if you're looking for a sexual relationship and saying it. Eh, If that is what you're looking for, your dating profile should be very explicit about it. Hype yourself up in the same way that you do if you're looking for a relationship. I can tell you right now, my dating profiles are all about I'm fantastic plus one material. I am a wonderful person to date because we're going to have a lot of fun. If I'm predominantly pursuing sexual relationships, oh, I'm going to make reference to the exact same. I promise you're going to enjoy yourself. We're going to have a great time. Everybody's going to, you're going to get better results for what you're looking for. Are you maybe going to get as many hits? No, but you're going to get hits who are in it for the same thing that you are. And I really hope that no one listening to listening to this needs to be told that, but then it's just as valid to be in the dating world for sex and to have that as the primary goal and to articulate that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I the slut shaming aspect of it gets hit on a lot. The reality is, I think a lot of the people who do it are just jealous that they think women get a pass to acknowledge that they're interested in sex where they feel like men don't. You only don't because you haven't given yourself permission to do it. No one's judging. There's no referee. There's no one to tell you how to maintain your dating life except you.
And I think the biggest concern really is, and one of the reasons we harp so much about expectation setting, boundary setting, and things like that, is it's all about staying safe. Right? We're trying to add new people to our lives that are productive, that are good for our life in some way. Right? Whatever that good for means to us in that time, in that moment. And part of what that means is acknowledging they are a new person. They are a semi unknown, perhaps is the way to put it. And then how do we do that? And because they're semi unknown, because they're people we're inviting into our orbit, our entire defense mechanism can't be the usual, I will situationally aware myself into safety, or I'll just shoot them. Well, I don't know about you, but that could get a little awkward on the dating scene, and it might not be necessary.
And small towns are wonderful. I don't want to be the guy who shot his last girlfriend. That ruins my chances of getting the next girlfriend. Um,
And it might not have been necessary.
I Not just necessary. And as we're getting to know these people, What happens if they've got an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend? What happens if they're going through some psychiatric trauma?
And what
Um,
happens when that shows up on your date?
the Even if legally you're clear, I have referenced on my page multiple times, like, no, no, fuck Uncle Billy at the family function I because we all have that one uncle. But the same is just as true in the dating world. The same is more true in the dating world where ego is so involved. Past rejection hurts, and I'm just as worried about my next girlfriend's ex boyfriend as I am my Uncle Billy who's going to have too much to drink at Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
Um, and these are things that it's one in a thousand, but if we don't acknowledge that risk, we can't mitigate it, and we don't even know what to look for as we're having conversations with potential partners.
Right.
Tell me about your last relationship is a valid question.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really tough first date material. But if you're looking at seeing each other a little bit more, or for instance, if there's kids involved, my partner has a daughter, and that's something that we talked about right up front because that makes an impact to our relationship and our life and my life.
So, online dating pitfalls. I I th- I think that just like in the case of your partner who has a child, I had a vasectomy about 5 years ago. That is absolutely, in my eyes, maybe not even first date material. That's within the first handful of messages. My This is who I am, because that can be such a deal breaker. In the
There's
case
not
of
going to
your
be
part,
kids.
well, and in the case of your partner, I'm sorry, if I was trying to date them, that would absolutely be a deal breaker because I'm not particularly kid friendly. And I would much rather know that before there's an investment.
Hmm.
On the same side, we don't maybe want to live. So I have tastefully arranged in the back corner here a couple firearms, because from left to right on screen here is a Browning A5, a Henry single shot, and an AR-15. I don't necessarily want the AR to show up within the first month of somebody knowing me. The other
Thing
two are
is,
sporting guns. The other two I'm going to make reference of as I talk about my very rural upbringing.
hmm
But we don't necessarily want to be typecast into, as a former military dude, I don't want to be the stereotypical conservative. I don't want to be written off for something that they think that I am.
and the other thing that I think about too is, in the rush to become familiar with this person, to get to know them, because the more I get to know them, the more I feel like maybe I can be safe. I can spot that creepiness early, and we could talk about whether or not that's effective. That's a whole other problem. But I want to be very careful about, well, what kind of, I don't want people to know what kind of valuables might be in my house. I don't want them to know, like, if I had a child, I'd be very cagey about who they were, what they looked like, where they went to school. I'm very cagey about where I work, where I go, because the last thing you want, and I'm I may have posted stories about this before, but I've certainly seen them, is having an online suitor show up at your workplace.
And that one, I'm sure the majority of people listening are going to go, "Oh, physical security, that's a standard problem that only impacts women." Um, for my sector of IT, that's a serious blow to employment, because at that point they begin to question who I am, what I'm doing, and am I reliable and to be trusted? Can I be trusted with elevated privileges if I'm having someone who I don't know show up at work? Um, that is a problem across the board. That maybe I get it. The lighting was perfect. I've been guilty of this before, but let's not use the selfie from the work parking lot, because your badge may be hidden, but other people have posted that same picture, and uh, individuals will know where it's at.
That's one of the downsides of small town living and one of the upsides of generic suburbs living, by the way. All parking lots look alike.
You Panda Express and 7-Eleven in the background. I got you. I
Yeah, which one? There's a Wawa next door. Okay.
I
There's a Wawa next door to everywhere around here. Exactly.
the that idea that someone may show up and not mean us physical violence is, I think, in a lot of ways more difficult. Because if they show up and they don't mean physical violence, but they have taken offense at something I've done, they have taken offense at something that they think that I did. Even if I have zero interest in pursuing them further forward as a date, as a anything, I don't want to pepper spray somebody at work. There are consequences to
Yeah.
that there are consequences to our actions here that extend far beyond dating. And we really do need to be mindful of how easy we make it for someone who is maybe just having a rough patch. I in my 30s, the vast majority of the swiping that I do is on people who are divorced and, to be honest, recently divorced. I I'm at that age range where they're looking for husband number two or maybe three. And they're very recently separated from their last relationship. Having lived that, you go through some stuff and you're maybe not thinking the most clearly. It's nothing to do with, we're not talking psychosis, we're not talking schizophrenia. Sometimes you're just in a place emotionally where you're not making the best decisions.
Hmm.
Um,
And that's something that we have to, kind of make ourselves safe from without, again, going back to this boundaries thing. I don't necessarily want to have to say, and you're not allowed to come to my workplace, you're not allowed to come to my home, blah, blah, blah. Like some of this we should absolutely be able to rely on being unstated. But I have to know that those are my boundaries so that I don't accidentally let you pass them unknowingly. Like, what if I had not really had the boundary of you don't get to know where I live early in our dating relationship? And he goes, hey, can I give you a ride home? What's my answer?
and entirely removed from physical safety, if we don't know what that boundary is and we suddenly feel anxious and uncertain about it, we are not going to be comfortable with that relationship. I remember you and I talking about that incident after it happened, and you continued to be with your partner because you had that boundary and you were not suddenly very unnerved about the relationship and, oh my god, I let this happen and I'm not comfortable with it, which leads to a knee-jerk ending of the relationship. In your case, it's not been necessary, it's not been anything other than positive.
Mm-hmm.
I Good boundaries are like good fences, they make everyone around us just a little bit better.
Yep. So we've talked a lot about, this sort of tentative toe in the pool, right? Like what it's like to get into the dating life. And I think we want to continue. We're going to do a couple more episodes here, kind of going through the life cycle of a relationship. Um, and we always hope that certain phases last longer than others, including the first one for some people. But next time, I think we want to talk about like what happens when we've decided to shift those boundaries, let them slide around a little bit, and let people in closer. Maybe we decide that that friends with benefits relationship, we both mutually decide we want that to be something more. Or, we've had those first dates and this is looking a little bit more serious, and what it's like to integrate that new person all the way into our lives without it being something that compromises our safety at all levels. So any parting thoughts before we move on?
To be honest, we are hardwired to be excited about new relationships. We are hardwired to be excited about being intimate with individuals. This aspect of it, it's predominantly focused on applying the brakes. I need to apply the brakes to make sure that I'm thinking clearly when a girl is looking into the back room of her trailer, and that tingling sensation in the back of my head tells me that her actual boyfriend's back there, and I'm not gonna like it if my pants come off. Um, Applying the brakes and being upfront about why you're applying the brakes is, in anyone that you want to have a relationship with, not going to be looked upon as anything other than um, respecting and a good boundary enforcement. It may be that your boundaries aren't compatible with theirs, but anyone who will yell at you for establishing your boundaries is not someone that you want to be with.
For anything. And I do want to just, I do have one more thing. I always do. Girls, if you normally carry any form of weapons, find a way to bring at least some of them on that date. It's not just that you might have to, defend yourself against the rapist. It is part of you and your boundaries. Like that, if you feel the need in other areas of your life to be able to defend certain boundaries, then you need to be able to defend those boundaries in this more intimate part of your life as well. And there are ways to hide all of these things in all sorts of outfits. So, and this is Tuna, and she would like to agree.
Um, on the fantastic note of tuna face, I think that's it for this episode.
Yeah. All right. Then
Awesome.
we'll be back next time around.